Hello, welcome. Today is December 28th, 2019, and this is going to be part 2 of the study that will show that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was actually a Levite. And this is possible because Jesus was not, like the church dogma of Chalcedon claims, made from her womb flesh. There have been some Bible verses that have been tempered with, also mistranslated. For example, in the King James Bible, Romans 1 verse 3 is a good example, which says that Jesus was, quote, made, unquote, of the seed of David, when in fact it says that he genomenon ek, so he came from or out of the ancestry of David. And what they have also done in early times, and this can be seen in a book that some people don't like to make mention of because Bart Ehrman fell away from the quote-unquote Christian faith, which of course is a church faith based on church membership and, believing in these church dogmas. So what did he essentially fall away from? But before he fell away in 1993, he wrote that book, The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, and this book is quite interesting, and it mentions, among other things, that Romans 1 verse 3 has been tempered with, so that it says genomenon ek, which would mean born of the seed of David according to the flesh, and thus the ancestry, which would make Mary of the house of David, because that was a problem that people were faced with, that according to the Bible, Mary was not of the house of David. I'm going to read you quotes later on from a Roman Catholic. This book, The Birth of the Messiah, from Raymond E Brown. Quite a large book. And he admits that this is true. I'm going to read you from a book, New Testament Apocrypha, More Non-Canonical Scriptures, from Tony Burke and Brent Landau. And there is a interesting Apocrypha in here, just called On the Priesthood of Jesus. Yeah? I'm not going to go into the story of the Apocrypha, but the footnotes are interesting because they help you find source material for this Levitical ancestry of Mary. What's also quoted is this book. I don't think you can read that. Hold on. Let me help you. So that's a German title. Walter Bauer, Das Leben Jesu im Zeitalter der neutestamentlichen Apokryphen. I'm sure there must be an English version of this somewhere. But yeah, that book is quoted in this one, like I told you. Then I have quotes from Theodor Zahn, Forschungen, and this is part 6, so it's also an older book, and it's quoted in the New Testament Apocrypha book. There is stuff in here. I had a few quotes written down on paper. Not sure if it's going to be necessary to read from these, because your own research will also show you more things. But let's pivot off one more time off of Hebrews 7 verse 15 through 16, because it also said that Jesus arose from Judah. And we're going to show one more time that this means that he inherited the promises made to David through Joseph. So here it says, and it is yet far more evident if in the likeness of Melchizedek there arises another priest who has come, not according to the law of a fleshly commandment, but according to the power of an endless life. So it's kind of interesting that the Marian flesh side, as I would call them, so those proponents of a Jesus who was 50% from below, they would say, well, Jesus can't be a Levite because it says here that he received his priesthood not according to the law of a fleshly commandment, but according to the power of an endless life. They make other mistakes that for example, they say, well, Mary went to the temple to present Jesus, and this wouldn't have happened to a Levite. But they forget that Jesus was not a Levite according to the flesh. And we are not doing the study to somehow prove that Jesus had a claim to Levitical priesthood, but we're merely showing that Mary was a Levite. And there is other significance in there, because the inheritance of Levi, Aaron through Phinehas, must have merged into another priesthood because the law was changed, but yet Phinehas was given the promise of an eternal priesthood. I talked about that in the first part, so I'm not going to explain too much on top of that. I mentioned that Jeremiah 33 also quotes this. So there are actually two promises made, one to David, one to the tribe of Levi. And so the problem that really the other side is faced with is that if Mary had only a shred of Aaronite flesh in her, and according to their rules, that could mean that her mother or her grandmother or her grandfather or her father, somebody in that family of that line, if he was of Aaron or she, then Jesus received the priesthood somehow through flesh, because they say that's required. Jesus can only be the Messiah if he received Davidic flesh from the Virgin. And then this would contradict Hebrews 7. So really, this verse goes against them. I have another video where I'm showing that the genealogy in Luke 3 is not of Mary, and that this is based on a Jewish fable called Doctrina Jacobi from 634 AD. Nobody serious would claim that Luke is Mary's genealogy, but if you would claim such a thing, you would be faced with the issue that in this genealogy you find Levite names. Now I know, of course, that this is Joseph's genealogy, so let's find a good pivot point here. Maybe we're just going to start off with the prophetic utterance in Isaiah 7 verse 14. It says, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive in the womb, and shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Emmanuel." So this is Isaiah 7 verse 14 from the Brenton Septuagint translation. And as we know, this is quoted in the New Testament and then applied to Mary. So Mary is the virgin, but we also know that the Israelites claim that this Alma, this Hebrew word in the Hebrew Masoretic text, means young woman and doesn't necessarily refer to a virgin. So I pulled two things out of that. First of all, and I will mention this later, Mary was young, that's significant, but also that this prophecy had actually two fulfillments. One was later in Mary, because Jesus was conceived in the Virgin, but it was also applied to the time that Isaiah lived in. And it says on creationwiki.org for Abi or Abijah, she was the mother of King Hezekiah, and you find that in 2 Chronicles, of the kingdom of Judah, and her father was the high priest Zechariah the second. Now isn't that interesting? So that means that you had a Jewish king of Judah whose mother was the daughter of a high priest, meaning of Aaron, and thus a Levite. It says further, Abijah is the person named in the Old Testament, is a person named in the Old Testament. She was the daughter of Zechariah, possibly Zechariah, the son of Jeberechiah, and afterwards the wife of King Ahaz and mother of King Hezekiah. So it says she is also called Abi, and I'm sorry, there's a motorcycle. I hope this is not going to be too much of a disturbance. It says then some writers consider Abijah to be the Alma, or young woman, at the time of the prophecy in the Emmanuel prophecy in Isaiah 7:14. I haven't done enough research to make up my own mind, but from all that I have read, it's highly likely that this was the person. So that would mean that the prophetic utterance was made of a young woman who was an Aaronite, just like we're saying Mary was. And that just like Mary, who married Joseph, Abijah married King Ahaz and was the mother of King Hezekiah. So, an interesting thing here. Then I want to read you something, and I have this from an article. You see, this is what I do. I print out stuff and then I read it and try to figure stuff out, right? Because that's what you got to do. So this is from britishisrael.us. There is some stuff, or a lot of stuff on that website that I personally cannot confirm as far as a historical fact, because why would I believe something if I can't at least prove it to some degree biblically? But in here it reads, first of all, I'm going to reread this from Phinehas. Phinehas was promised an everlasting priesthood, and with the murder of Aristobulus, the last of the Hasmoneans, by Herod the Great, the Aaronic succession was nullified. And we're going to look at that in this New Testament Apocrypha book a little bit later on. But then further, it says the Hebrew word, according to Matthew's genealogy, there were 3 Davidic kings who had Levite mothers. They are as follows: Abijah, whose mother was Micaiah, the daughter of the Levite Uriel, 2 Chronicles 13, 1-2. Jatham, whose mother was Jerusha, the daughter of the Levite Zadok, 2 Chronicles 27, 1. And number 3, Hezekiah, whose mother was Abijah, the daughter of the Levite Zechariah, 2 Chronicles 29, 1. So that means it wasn't something out of the ordinary when daughters of high priests married Israelite or kings of Judah. And we're talking about Matthew's genealogy now of Joseph. Because some people claim that Numbers 36 restricts that woman marry only inside their tribe, and this is demonstrably false, as we're seeing here. And it's logical also that it's false, because Levite men were allowed to pick women of any tribe, and because they had to, they didn't have a inheritance, meaning a part of the land, so of course they would marry some woman from some tribe. And if the women wouldn't be allowed to marry outside of their tribes, who's going to marry the Levites? That doesn't make any sense. So let me go to the book from Raymond E Brown, and I'm going to read you some quotes. Let me hold it up one more time. I threw it far away. So it reads, Le Deu, Miriam points out that in the early Targum Neophyti on Exodus 1:14, Miriam of the tribe of Levi was considered to have received the crown of royalty, for she was to be the ancestor of David. Luke's Mary, who is betrothed to the house of David, has a relative, Elizabeth, who is of the house of Levi, descended from Aaron. So he makes the connection because Miriam is actually Mary, and Miriam is a Levite name. You know, she was the sister of Aaron and Moses. And this was page 116. Then it says, Gentile writers often did not understand how Jesus could be truly a Davidite through Joseph, who did not beget him, and so were forced to think of Mary as a Davidite. Page 288. Mark it. Gentile writers often did not understand. So this is what it's based on. This whole idea, well, she had to be of the house of David, because otherwise how could Jesus? Because they also think that Jesus had her flesh, which I showed in the last video is based on the pagan idea that Jesus came to deify humankind, which is not true. He came to save sinners. Then it says Matthew gives the legal male parents from Salome to Jeconiah, while Luke gives the natural parents of Jeconiah to Neri, back through Nathan to David. Yet in this monarchical era, Luke has names not attested elsewhere at all for this period, or attested only in the post-exilic period, or only Levitically. That means, like I told you before, in Luke's genealogy, which is not from Mary, but even if it was, you have names in there that are only found in Levitical ancestry. Page 588. And then page 589 says, if Mary was of the house of David, why would it be necessary to tell readers about Joseph's lineage? Later church writers did attribute Davidic descent to Mary, not necessarily through the Lucan genealogy. Well, yeah, I mean, I mentioned that. Nobody thought of that before 634 AD. Watch the other video. But that often stemmed from an inability to understand that in a Jewish mindset, through Joseph's acknowledgement, Jesus could be legally, even if not biologically, Joseph's son and thus share Davidic descent. Page 589. I apologize that this phone is now... I need to put this somewhere else. Don't want this to be a distraction. So again, legally, Jesus was a son of David through Joseph. We'll see this through quotes later on. Let me read one more time Luke 1 verse 5. There was in the days of Herod the king of Judea a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. We're going to take a look at that in a moment with a little more detail. But before we do that, we are going to read about... now this is a difficult word. Matrilineality. Okay, so that means that your tribal kinship is connected to the mother, which is totally unbiblical, and it's even, to say this to the Jews, untalmudic. Now to me that doesn't matter much, but I'm going to read you a quote from the Talmud here in a second. First of all, though, from Wikipedia, Orthodox Jews who believe that matrilineality, what a word, and matriarchy within Judaism are related to the metaphysical concept of the Jewish soul. So now we're delving into mysticism, Jewish Kabbalah. That's what it's based on. Maintain that matrilineal descent is an oral law from at least the time of the covenant of Sinai. Conservative Jewish theologian Rabbi Louis Jacobs suggests that the marriage practices of the Jewish community were restated as a law of matrilineal descent in the early Tanaitic period. And when was that? 10 through 70 of the Common Era, which means after Jesus. You mean they changed some laws so that they could start claiming, well, it actually goes through the mother anyway. Because here's the interesting thing. in this Doctrine of Jacobi, you see that it's a Jewish legend that claimed that Luke 3 is Mary's genealogy. So it looks to me a little bit like, I'm suspecting this, that this whole idea, this whole confusion was actually a Jewish idea in order to confuse the Christians and, you know, possibly also take part in building this Gnostic, pagan Roman Catholic system that we call church. Next, let me read this quote from the Talmud. So this is the Babylonian Talmud, Bauer Batra 109b. Kinsman is referring specifically to someone who is of his family. And it is the father's family that is called one's family, while one's mother's family is not called one's family. Proof for this is found in another verse, as it is written, by their families, by their fathers' houses. Numbers 1 verse 2. So there you go. Your Babylonian Talmud even tells you that kinsman refers to the father's line. Okay? This becomes significant in a second, because now we're going to take another look at this Luke 1 verse 5 and 36. So we see in 1 verse 5 that Elizabeth was from out of the daughters of Aaron. So that was her point of origin. That's who she was among when she was born into this world. Now, some people have tried to claim that Elizabeth might also have been of the house of David and counted as an Aaronite because she was married to Zechariah, because they see a problem that we're going to discuss in a second, that Mary's father must have been of the house of Aaron in order to make the connection between Elizabeth and Mary. Further, in verse number 7, we learn that Elizabeth and Zacharias were advancing in their days. So they were old. They were not Mary's age, because Mary was young. So why is it significant? It's significant because in verse 36 you read, "Behold, Elizabeth, your relative, in her old age has conceived." So it's relevant because Elizabeth is not Mary's cousin. Let me rephrase that. It's highly unlikely that she was. It's a lot more likely that Elizabeth was her aunt. Now, to me personally, it doesn't make the biggest difference, but here is the claim that is made. The claim is made that people would say, okay, well, Elizabeth was of the daughters of Aaron. Yeah, and I just told you it's nonsense to say that somebody came out of the daughters of Aaron and that somehow she received this daughters of Aaron title by being married to Zacharias. I mean, she would belong to the stock of Aaron by the marriage. I get that. But then you can't really say she is from the daughters of Aaron. That does not make any sense at all. So, important point number 1, Elizabeth's father was an Aaronite, 100%. You can take this as unimpeachable truth, okay? That would mean her mother, according to this other theory, would have been a sister of Mary's father. Let me put this book away. And or respectively Mary's mother. But I'm going to tell you why this does not work. This doesn't work because if you check out this word here, this suganes, okay, your relative, which in the New Testament Hebrew Delit text which uses ancient Hebrew, uses the Hebrew word for near, so blood relationship. So Elizabeth, the blood relative to Mary, if you analyze that word and you grab the Septuagint, then you find how Numbers 1 verse 2 that we had looked at before, how it says, take the sum of all the congregation of the sons of Israel according to their kin. And here's this suganeis, yeah? So their blood relatives and houses of their patrimony. Okay? Mark that. Patrimony. Patriarch. You heard the word patriarch. Where does that come from? Pater. Father. So it's connected to your father. It says in Luke 2 verse 4 that Joseph was of the house and patrias, okay, so the family of David. This is proof now that being a kinsman of somebody, when they're listed through genealogy, that this goes through the father's side. Because these people have speculated that maybe Elizabeth's mother was from David, and that's why Mary was a blood relative, so a suganeis, to Elizabeth through the house of David. Now, this is not possible because, as we learn in Numbers 1 verse 2, a suganeis goes through the house of the patrimony, which means that if Elizabeth, as a daughter of Aaron, must have been a blood relative from the tribe of Aaron of Mary. There's just no other possibility. Now, like I mentioned before, because of the advanced age of Elizabeth and the fact that Mary went and spent 3 months with her when she found out that she would be pregnant and conceive the Messiah, it is highly likely, I would say it's almost evident, that Elizabeth was the sister of Mary's father, meaning her aunt from her father's side. And now the whole thing makes sense. We have also seen this before, like I mentioned, that kings or sons of kings from the tribe of Judah, of the house of David, that they married daughters of high priest stock from Aaron. We also read for patria, lineage, running back to some progenitor, ancestry, a race or tribe, a group of families, all those who live, who in a given people lay claim to a common origin. And as such, you'll read that in Numbers 3 verse 15, number the sons of Levi, of their patrimony, their suganeas, kin, their blood relationship. Now, one more time, you can count as a suganeis of somebody when you're a woman, when you have married into another tribe. But this does not make you a daughter of the tribal progenitor, so the patriarch. Now, people are very, very tricky. For example, Origen. He would say, well, in Romans 9 verse 3, Paul calls people of other tribes his suganeis, according to the flesh. And then they say, well, so Elizabeth, being a daughter of Aaron, Mary could have been something, right? Well, people need to learn to read exactly what the Bible says. It talks about Paul's brothers according to the flesh. And then he says that they are Israelites. Now, who is Israel? Israel is Jacob. So he already says regarding the patrimony, so the sugenes, according to the flesh, which would mean the house of the patrimony of Jacob. And of course, then Paul, being a Benjaminite, is the brother of any Levite or Judite or whatever you want to take, Simeonite, Reubenite, because he goes back to Israel and not, he doesn't say, for my brothers of my relatives according to the flesh, because I am of Benjamin. And, he says specifically, he's referring to Israel. And Luke 1 verse 5, though, talks about daughter of Aaron. So if we talk about a sugenes of somebody that comes out of this, according to the flesh, out of this tribe, then it's proven to anybody honest that doesn't try to by force uphold a dogma that's not biblical, it's proven that Mary has to be, no question, a Levite. This is proven in the text of the Bible. By many other things, it's suggested that she is. And people have tried to twist the Bible to make it say something else in order to uphold a pagan dogma that says Jesus came to deify us. Now, you maybe think that the people who want to uphold this have already taken some steps to deification and already see them as some type of god, and now you're coming and shaking their foundation that Satan has put in their heads and told them, you will be a little god. I would say that's where the problem lies. That these people cannot honestly analyze this anymore. They are incapable of it because they already went down the depth of Satan. Now, here is another thing that I see as problematic, and that is, people know I cannot go to the church club on Sunday if I don't say that Mary was of the house of David. Or, let me put it another way, Jesus said, if I tell you something in the ear, shout it on the rooftop. If I tell you something in darkness, speak it at the light. You cannot go to church and be quiet about this because it's an important fact. I've heard the most outrageous claims. For example, they say in Matthew 1 verse 1, which demonstrably also proves that Jesus Christ's sonship of David is not derived because of some flesh he took from Mary, but because he's from Joseph. It lists the genealogy of Joseph. Now they say, well, here it says the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, and so he was generated by and thus through Mary, and this is why he's the son of. But then they totally overlook that this is Joseph's genealogy, Matthew 1. Also, the claim that the G1078 means that he's generated out of that flesh is incorrect. It simply is incorrect because Jesus was not generated out of Joseph's flesh. It means that this is where he originated, because he was born into the family. Now we're going to get to the book from Theodor, he was a German, Theodor Zahn, which means tooth, Theodor Tooth, Theodor Zahn, you would probably call him in English. Page 328. Mary was his, Joseph, the Davidian's, spouse when she birthed Jesus. Aha. Jesus was erroneously thought to be the son of David. He was this according to the law. Exactly, and we read that over and over again in the New Testament. Is this not the carpenter's son? And his parents are Mary and Joseph. People thought he was, but he wasn't. He said himself that he wasn't, if you haven't noticed that in the Bible. The legal paternity of Joseph has importance, because only when Jesus is the son of a Davidian, he himself is a Davidian. So, legal paternity. On the next page, in a footnote, actually no, that's on the same page in the footnote, he says, I do not deem it necessary to once again prove that Matthew 1, 1 through 16, Luke 1, 27, 2, 4, 3, 23 through 31, merely state factually the Davidic ancestry of Joseph, as well as that the status in the eyes of his people as the Messiah and son of David are based on his never challenged legal sonship of Joseph, that is, Jesus, as whose son he was regarded by friends and enemies alike, John 1:45. The fable of the Davidic ancestry of Mary first occurs in the proto-gospel of James. Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox just love this book of lies, okay? It's not part of the gospel. It's not part of the Bible. It doesn't belong there, and it states lies, okay? Then, in Justin the Martyr's Dialogues with Trypho, 43, 45, 100, 120, his friend Tatian then forced it along Luke 2:4 into the Diatessaron. From the 3rd century onward, this was almost the sole viewpoint, but as little as it is found in the New Testament, there is not found a trace in the Jewish Christian literature. Gospel to the Hebrews, Ebionites, Clement, or Hegesipp. Now, isn't it interesting? In the same time frame, when all these Greek church fathers, okay, so these pagans, these pagan liars, when they develop their Trinitarian lie, yeah, 3 persons from eternity past, sharing one impersonal substance, and now I have the divine nature in me, and I'm becoming a god. Those people who fabricated those lies are the same, or let me put it another way, in the same time frame, this stuff that Mary somehow is of the house of David popped up. Isn't that interesting? It is. I'm going to say it again because the kingdom of darkness didn't understand when they crucified Jesus that they slew the word of God. They wanted to turn that around somehow and not make anybody know what happened. That's why it says that it's Antichrist's spirit to deny that Jesus came in flesh. They say he took on flesh, which would mean he came inside flesh, but not that he appeared as flesh. That which was from the beginning, which we have seen with our eyes, touched with our hands, handled, right? Concerning the word of life, the word became flesh. Satan needed to bury this, and this was part of the whole undertaking. In order to make a straw man, if he wasn't made of the virgin's womb flesh, he couldn't be Davidic. Really. Very, very high-level trickery. God promised that he would send a strong delusion. If you don't search this out for yourself, you're going to fall for it. I can tell you this. Next page. Africanus was already forced to counter the attempt to prove the double ancestry of Jesus from Levi and Judah. He who claimed the latter at the same time claimed Mary to be of Davidic ancestry, both found in Irenaeus. The same had to find skillful, artificial means to prove it. Yeah, you had to be very skillful, because not in the New Testament. And Irenaeus was the guy who claimed apostolic succession is where it's at, and the Church of Rome should be the guidance. All right, so you better learn from that. So, I apologize. No in-depth analysis of these and similar claims is necessary to see that this is a very ancient, distorted idea based on an assumption of a Davidic ancestry of Mary that was, though initially connected to the Levitical ancestry of Mary. So, they knew she was a Levite, and then they framed all this other stuff because of an ancient, distorted idea. The witness tradition from Hegesipp of the priestly privileges of the Apostle James, son of Joseph, is also connected to this. So James they say, was serving in the temple. How did he do that if he didn't have Levite ancestry? Now, I need to say something though. This is not in the Bible. So if James was a priest in the temple or not, it's outside of my knowledge. I don't know. I'm only mentioning this to show you that these opinions were floating around in the same time. But who talks about this today? Have you ever heard a sermon in your church building about the Levitical ancestry of Mary? Probably not. Then, on the next page, in the footnote, it says, according to a legend, Joachim was another name for Moses, and his name after the Assumption was supposedly Melchi, which both point towards Levitical pedigree in Luke 3. Yeah, that's just another interesting thing. Yeah, why always these Levitical names? Where does that come from? So now we are going to turn to... Well, I just want to mention this Numbers 36 stuff. If they are married to any sons of another tribes of the children of Israel, then their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our fathers, and it will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. Now this was, according to the book of Numbers 36, this was when daughters didn't have brothers that were alive, and then they married into another tribe, then the inheritance shifted to the other tribe. So that's why they were supposed to stay in their own tribe. Let's speculate Mary did not have a brother. Let's just speculate. Could it be that it was a desired thing in this case, that the inheritance, meaning the promise passed down from Levi, Aaron, and so forth, to have that merge into Jesus, because there was no Aaronic ancestor to receive the promises of Phinehas? I mean, we don't know this, but certainly this would override this requirement, because this would be a spiritual inheritance that had to be passed on according to God's promise. So, first of all, you would have to prove that Mary did not have a brother that was alive, or somebody that could, that was by Levite marriage or somehow counted as the son of Mary's father, who supposedly was Davidic. Yeah, so there are so many premises here. Mary's father would have had to be Davidic, not Aaronic. That's why she couldn't marry into the other tribe, because of Numbers 36, which though may have been desired because the inheritance of Phinehas had to be merged into somebody. And then the law was changed, and we learn this, as I will read in a second, from prophecies of Genesis 49 and Daniel chapter 9. So next, let us go to Burke and Landau. Page, where's the page number? Oh, I gotta give you the page number somehow. I'm not sure why I don't have it here. I apologize. I really want to give you the page number on the priesthood of Jesus. So this starts off at page 71. So the pattern of intermarriage between the tribes of Judah and Levi, this is what it talks about here. It says that claim is strikingly different from the representation of the priesthood of Jesus in the epistle to the Hebrews, for it is evident, writes the author of Hebrews, that our Lord was descended from Judah. Now, again, go back to the first video, you'll see that it doesn't say was descended from, but arose from. Big difference, because Jesus, of course he arose from the house of Judah. But the Greek language doesn't say was descended from. It's a mistranslation. And isn't it funny that so often Bibles are mistranslated, words are added, Hebrews 2 verse 16, King James Bible, 4 words in a row, on him the nature of, to make him pick up some nature, take on flesh. Why always this twisting of God's word? in translations. What for? Could it be that it was hypostatic union, pagan priests that have translated those Bibles? So you better take a second look every time you analyze something like that. So, but again, Jesus cannot have had, or Mary cannot have had a percentage of Aaron's flesh then, because otherwise he would have descended from Aaron according to the flesh. What a weird logic, right? So it says, though categorically opposed to the viewpoint of Hebrews, the representation of Jesus and on the priesthood of Jesus as a priest of mixed Judite and Levitical ancestry, nevertheless is deeply rooted in Christian tradition. We've seen that before. So you have a messianic high priest and king arising from the tribes of Judah and Levi, and a dual role of Levitical high priest and Judite king. And how would that work if they wouldn't be arising from those tribes? You know, like the Hasmoneans, for example. The Hasmoneans were descended, so as the patriarch from them would have been Aaron, and then they had mothers from the house of David. And so there was this big problem back then that people said, you guys don't have a claim to the throne because you're priests from Aaron. And they said, well, yeah, but through the mother and all this type of stuff. So, you know, you can certainly arise from two tribes. I don't see the problem. But on the other hand, I would say it's not biblical language to say that somebody arises from two tribes, and we know that legally Joseph counted as Jesus' father. So this is the way that you have to understand it, because it's the biblical way to understand it. So he quotes here from the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. We are not sure if they were written before or after Christ. Some say that they were written because of the political issues back then in with the Hasmoneans. I think this was Basil of Caesarea that says it. He says, after the return from the captivity, rule over the Jewish nation transferred to the priesthood due to mixing of royal and priestly tribes, anointed rulers descended from Levi and Judah at the time of Jesus. He didn't say that here. Somewhere it said that this is because of political stuff. I can't find that quote right now. So in the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, in Testament from Simeon 7:1-3, it says, and now, my children, be obedient to Levi and Judah, because from them will arise the Savior come from God. For the Lord will rise up from Levi someone as high priest, and from Judah someone as king. And then they say God and man here in brackets. Yeah. He will save all the Gentiles and the tribes of Israel. So this idea was around, even among people who penned this down, who were saying that, you have this God-man thing going on, this hypostatic union stuff. Whereas we're talking about a man begotten out of God, who thus was God that became a man. I mean, sometimes I wonder why the simple language, Son of God, a human Son of God, a Son of Man that is the Son of God, why that doesn't make sense in people's heads, and they need to, bend and twist everything in the Bible to make it fit. On the next page, this is page 72, it says, in Christian exegesis, the representation of Jesus as Levitical priest and Judite king also appears in conjunction with a messianic interpretation of two other much discussed verses from Jewish scriptures. One is Jacob's prophecy to Judah in Genesis 94:10 Septuagint, a ruler, archon, shall not be wanting from Judas, and a leader, hegomenos, from his thighs until the things stored up for him come. The other is Gabriel's revelation to Daniel of the cutting off of an anointed ruler. So Christou hegomenu, Daniel 9:25-26. Because both passages taken together suggested to Christian interpreters that a precondition for the coming of the Messiah was the cessation of Judahite kings and high priests, the collapse of the Hasmonean dynasty not long before the birth of Jesus was said to have satisfied the terms of both prophecies. Proponents of this interpretation held that the succession of post-exilic high priests involve, like Jesus himself, rulers of mixed Levitical and Judahite ancestry. Mary was one most often said to be of mixed lineage, page 74. Isn't that interesting? She was the one most often said to be of mixed lineage. And you will see that during the time of Aaron the priest, there was a mixing between Aaron and Judah, that is to say, from David after having examined the facts and so forth and so forth. So this, of course, is because of Phinehas being born to Eleazar, and who was an Aaronite, and Elisheba, who was the daughter of Amminadab, the tribal leader of Judah in the desert. So you had a mixture in the Aaronite stock very early on. Phinehas' father. Phinehas was actually a half-breed according to that logic. But of course, he was an Aaronite. They would have said about him, it's evident that Phinehas arose from Aaron. Nobody would say, well, he was Aaronite Judean. No. Then here in the footnotes, you can read this kinswoman stuff if you want to. I'm not going to read all that again, but it refers to these books that I showed you, Bauer and Zahn. Talks about pre-Eusebian witnesses to the genealogy of Jesus, like Hippolytus. Talks about him being tribally mixed, descendant of both tribes. To be shown, you would be king and priest. It cites some French books, which my French, je parle un petit de français, but it's too long ago. I learned this in school. How long has that been ago? 25 years ago I learned French. Too long ago. But maybe it's enough to kind of read this, and then Google Translate would help me. But yeah. So it says here, Eusebius maintained that Luke implied only that Mary and Elizabeth were both Jews. No, it doesn't say that anywhere, and I've proven that it's not. Nothing is implied. It's stated actually that Mary was an Aaronite. Simple. I believe, and that's it for today. I didn't translate all the Bauer stuff because it pretty much reiterates the stuff that I told you here already. You can tell that Bauer is a little more pro-Mary as from David. And, well, what else does he quote? From Contra Faustus. And this was from Augustine, that Faustus the Manichaean also claimed that Mary was a Levite. So you could get some other quotes that in my opinion are insignificant to the understanding. Additional quotes, I would say that would claim that Jesus was from Levite and Judean stock. But I mean, I've quoted enough from that. You can read this Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. There are, I think, 4 or 5 quotes altogether that say, here they are. Testament of Simeon 7, Levi 2, Dan 5, Gad 8, and Joseph 19. So those would be the chapters of those testaments. And you would find that it says that he will arise from Judah and Levi. Again, they say this was because of political stuff, because of the Hasmoneans. I have no idea. But Theodor Zahn, he said that this is pagan Christian fiction to claim that Mary was of the house of David and that this was required because Jesus was made of her flesh. It doesn't have any biblical basis, and Wow, it's 53 minutes. I thought I could get this done in 25 today, but that's the way it is, I guess. What do you think? If you're very, very honest, just looking at the facts, do you still believe that Mary was of the house of David? Nah.